Hello, welcome to Big Bang Radio Spotlights. This is a show where we talk to independent artists from all around the world all about their music and their process for making it. I'm your host, Isaac Anderson, and today I get to sit down with Zach Gray from the band the Zolas. Without any further ado, here's the interview. Zach, thank you so much for joining me today. Really do appreciate it. Been very excited to talk to you. You're a super awesome musician. You seem like a super awesome guy. And I just want to start out like we start out all these interviews and when I talk to artists on the show. And the first question I want to ask you is, what is your earliest musical memory?
I think I was probably 10, and my dad picked me up from baseball practice, and we walked home together. And I didn't really notice because I was a kid, and kids don't really like pay attention to their parents' like emotional lives. But my dad was like, he said outright, like, "It's a very sad day today, son." And I asked him why, and he said, "Oh, well, have you heard of a band called Nirvana?" And I was like, "Yeah, I think so," because I'd heard of them but never heard their music. And he said, "Well, yeah, the singer he killed himself today, and I kind of feel like if he hadn't, then he'd be the next John Lennon." And then he walked me home and then sat me down in his office, still in my baseball uniform, and made me listen to all of In Utero.
Of all ones, In Utero, he didn't play You Nevermind in that moment. I feel like, but I mean, In Utero, I imagine it just came out at that time too. So
yeah, I think he preferred In Utero. I don't know. I guess he's an In Utero man. My dad's an In Utero guy.
Heard that. Well, speaking about your dad, so your dad is as a writer and composer, John McLaughlin Gray, and he's obviously very steeped in music, very steeped in the writing process and the creative process. What were some big takeaways of having a father have that sort of musicality? Like, was he really big in you getting into music, or did he did he want you to kind of discover your own path with that? I don't know. How was that?
So, my parents put me in piano, like lots of parents do, and then really quickly I threw too many fits before going, and I hated going. So they finally had to just throw their hands up and let me quit. And my dad, I guess he didn't want me to have lots of music because he was having some sort of crisis, thinking that his son wouldn't have any music in his life, and his friend, who was like his kind of cooler single friend, was like, "Listen, I'm going to give you this guitar. You just leave it around the house. As soon as that kid hits the right age, around when he starts being interested in girls or boys, just keep this guitar there, and he'll end up playing it. Don't worry." And that's exactly what happened. So yeah, no, he wanted me to be in music, but I think the number one thing about having a parent in the arts is that they don't get to say about what a bad decision you're making by joining this industry, because they did it and they lived to tell the tale. So it's comforting that way.
Just in your mind, like, was there a moment that like you realized, like, first off, I know you had you knew you had a love for music, but did you when did you realize, like, this music thing is not a hobby for me, this is going to be like my career path, this is what I'm going to do? Like, was there a time that you really thought that?
The first gig we ever got offered was to like about 100-person capacity bar on a little tourist island in Vancouver, and it was a band that we really liked. They were a local band, but they were gods to us, and they asked us to open for them. And I remember we were just going in to watch a movie in a movie theater when we got the call. And we looked at each other and we and we were just like speechless. We were just like, "Dude, we made it. We made it." And this is our first gig ever to about like 50 people. So that's when I thought that we had made it. So other than that, it turned out that wasn't true. Where like, I think a lot of people they spend their entire lives constantly thinking that this might be their last year as a musician or as an artist, and I'm like that too.
When the arrows volley down, will you stand with me? Build a fire on the pages of magazines. The time goes and we are right. Dance it out till the streets heat the night. Yeah.
When it comes to your writing and everything, how do you go about doing that? Do you have like regimented times, like, you know what, Friday is writing day. I like to write, Friday nights, or like you kind of just have music happen spontaneously in your life?
No, I kind of write when I have to. I kind of wish that I was one of those sort of blue collar writers that way, because it actually, I know that becomes a better way to do it, but I'm still an inspiration guy. Um, so I mean, what they say is like, you gotta, this isn't a saying, I'm just making this up, but like, you gotta cast your rod to catch any fish. So yeah, you might sit down and get nothing, but as long as you're showing up to cast your rod, at least once a day, or sometimes in like dry spells I'll go once a week. But yeah, um, I just make sure that I'm always thinking about that. And the one thing is that, like, I have a deal with myself that when a good idea comes up, whether even the smallest of a piece of a good idea, I'm not allowed to just shelve it. I have to stop everything and do it, and sort of follow that thread. That's my process. Other than that, it's just sort of painful, and I'm never sure that I'm ever going to write anything good ever again. And and just in the moment where I'm most convinced that I have nothing left to say, that's usually when the spark hits, and suddenly a whole other world opens up, and I realize that I've just begun.
Something interesting I heard about you is that the song "Swooner," like you got inspiration from that. I believe you were like on a plane and you watched Mulan. You forgot how like great Mulan was, and you wanted to write a song about like all the Mulans in your life, which I thought that was really cool because I love music, but I also love film and filmmaking. I'm just curious, like, are there any other movies that you've like ever seen that like kind of inspired something like that out of you, like, or do you take inspiration from movies like that all the time, or was that just kind of like a one-time thing?
Yeah, I mean, seldom lyrically, but in this album that we just put out called "Come Back to Life," it was inspired almost as much by movies as it was by albums. But I wouldn't say movies themselves. It was inspired by movie soundtracks. I was like really falling in love with music right when, in the sweet spot, when movie soundtracks were selling big time, like movie soundtrack CDs were selling really well, and it was actually a huge deal to get your song on a movie soundtrack. And the movies that came out, like the movie Train Spotting, for example, I wasn't allowed to watch, but I listened to the soundtrack about a million times before I ever was able to watch the movie, and I felt like I belonged in that world, that like heroin drenched corner of Edinburgh, I think it's Edinburgh. Is it Edinburgh or Glasgow? Do you know?
I believe it's Edinburgh. I believe you're right. It's been a while since I've watched it, but I believe that's correct.
So yeah, with this album, we really wanted to make something that felt like a sort of spiritual air to like the Train Spotting soundtrack and the Romeo and Juliet soundtrack, which was another one that was really huge for me. I often think about movies. I certainly think cinematically when we're writing songs, but lyrically, I think the closest we got lately was in the song "Young DiCaprio," where there's a whole bunch of Romeo and Juliet references, specifically from the movie.
What's one of the most unconventional things that you've taken inspiration from to like inspire a song? Like you might be washing the dishes and like there's like a scratching noise. Like anything like that? Like do you find anything like that happens to you when you're trying to come up with stuff?
I think the most unconventional one lately was a Reddit thread. I don't know if you spend any time on Reddit, but sometimes you can get pretty deep in there. And I was just combing Reddit and ended up on a subreddit probably called like Serious Question or something like that, and where people can ask a question that people can't troll them for. And that's part of the rules of the subreddit. And the question was, hey, like I'm a young gay kid, and I realized that we never learned anything about the AIDS crisis of the 80s and 90s, And I'm curious from some of the older guys out there, like what it was like. And it's a pretty innocuous question, and I don't know what he expected from it, but what followed was a breathtakingly human thread of guys talking about living through a series of almost a decade of not really being sure that that any of their friends would be alive from one week to the next, or whether they would be the next one, and the way that it felt when AIDS first came to North America, and people didn't know how you could get it, and they thought and the media and in some degrees to some degree the government was comfortable letting people just think of it as the gay disease, and that it was some sort of punishment for their sins. Um, and and these are all guys who are already ostracized, or in a lot of cases already ostracized from their communities, and they'd come together to find family, and in this case, and then no sooner did that happen, but this plague started to rip through them, and anyway, there was just it's easy to talk about it in a broad sense, but what really hit me was the details that these guys talked about. Was a lot of them used the chance in this thread to just talk about a specific person, like their boyfriend, that like one guy's boyfriend that he lost, and specifically what he missed about him, and how like this was someone that he wanted to spend the rest of his life with, and he wasn't even allowed to be in the hospital when he was dying because he wasn't a spouse. And yeah, that really hit me hard, and just other details like they used to just like leave their black suits hooked by the door because they knew they didn't know who was going to die, but they knew that they would be at a funeral next weekend, so they didn't even bother putting it away. And it kind of reminded me a lot of stories you hear about people going to war, how like, they're going out, they've had these really intense fast friends experiences with all these guys in their regiment or whatever, and then and they don't know if like after today, like they know some of them aren't going to be there tomorrow. And anyway, that was probably the most unconventional part of, like, I think we all get inspiration from literature and from movies and from other music and from stories our friends tell us, but I'd never gotten inspiration from a Reddit thread before. That song's called Prep, by the way. It's one of my favorites.
Heard that. It's amazing, like the internet is, it has done a lot of things, but and it's done a lot of good and bad things. But one good thing is it's really connected people, and you can really hear a lot of different things that like you wouldn't really know about, or you can really experience that, and people, can say a lot of garbage on there, but there's also a lot of heart and a lot of reality and a lot of a lot of things that people are really pouring themselves out in there. So I didn't know that. That's super cool. I might have to listen to that song again with a fresh perspective. So thank you for sharing that. I want to talk about your new album now. We mentioned it a little earlier in the interview, but your new album, Come Back to Life, it's out now on streaming platforms. Super awesome tunes, really cool. I know we were talking about it before the interview. I was asking you all some nerdy questions about the production of that, but just for everybody that's watching, what was the recording of that album like?
This is the first album that we completely self-produced. Although I shouldn't say completely, because we have an ex-member of the band, James Younger, he co-produced it with us. But this is the first time that we didn't just like hire a producer outright to help guide the sound of the record. And it was, that kind of was the defining feature of this album. For as long as I can think of, I've always had a plan for how I wanted my songs to sound, and had a really good idea of like what of like who I wanted to rip off in this way, and who I and I don't know, just like trying to make things sound, or certain parts sound like people that I really admire. And until this process, I never really thought that I could actually pull it off. And that's what we did. So yeah, we spent the studio that we used for the most of it was just at our label has a studio here, and we used a studio called Monarch Studios, kind of the best studio in town. We just kind of got together and we got to make sort of our Britpop dreams come true. That was kind of the idea, is like this album is a bit of a return to something that I never thought I would get to, like, because if you were to describe our music, the genre of this record, it sounds like sort of Britpop and kind of like 90s industrial music a little bit, and electronica, and a bit of acid house, and that's exactly the kind of music that I first fell in love with when I first even dreamed about maybe being in a band. And it's taken all this time to sort of circle back to actually making the record that like 16-year-old Zach would have flipped out for. So that's been really rewarding. I definitely feel like I've done my kid self proud.
Heard that. Well, the album's awesome. It's out on all the streaming platforms right now. And if people want to keep up with what you were doing and what the Zolas are going to be doing in the future, how can they keep up with you guys online?
You can follow us on Instagram if you want. Though I'm so cynical about that whole universe that I'm looking forward to figuring out a more direct way, and I'm sure this is something that you think about too with your channel. A more direct way of communicating with people who want to get involved with your band, because at the moment we're all sort of subject to the whims of whatever algorithm decides to present our posts to people. So Instagram's, but you can definitely follow us there, and that's where you can get a hold of us.
I really do appreciate you taking the time, Zach, to talk to us today. But before you go, I got one more question for you. Now, I think you might have seen some Big Bang Radio spotlights before, I'm not sure. But I'm a musician, but I love film. And I believe those two worlds are not too far away from each other. And I know we've talked about movies a little earlier in the interview, about some inspiration. But this is the way I like to end it, because it's always an interesting answer from everybody I ask. What's your favorite movie?
Gattaca. I feel like it might have changed. I think if I watched it again, I might not say that, but yeah, I think as far as my personal tomato meter, Gattaca is probably the highest on there. You should see it. It was science fiction when it came out in the 90s, and given the changes in technology, it's actually pretty much not science fiction anymore. It's a terrifying thing.
Thanks to Zach for sitting down with us and talking all about the Zolas music. If you guys want to see more interviews just like this, you can find us online at Studio 67 NCC. Thank you all for watching. I'm Isaac Anderson, and until next time, stay lovely.